This is the Biblical Mind Podcast, produced by the Center for Hebraic Thought. Honest 5-star reviews help others find this podcast. Visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org for articles and videos that explore the deep structures of Scripture.
For most people, we see that learning the biblical languages has become something like becoming a priest, something that they would never imagine doing, but they know some people feel called that way. And it's just not for the common man, you know. And so I think the root of that doubt or that question are three things. So for hundreds of years, there's been very intimidating methodology involved in learning Hebrew. And number two, there's been insufficient technology to teach the masses Hebrew. And then number three, the expense. So to break those down one by one, basically since the Middle Ages, most people have taught Hebrew with what's called the grammatical method. And this method treats the language more like a code you've got to learn to crack rather than something you use and enjoy. So with this method, you're really just introduced to a lot of complicated paradigms that you have to learn through rote memorization. That's not fun for most people. Most people look at that and they're intimidated and they feel like, okay, this isn't for me. And it feels like doing math, and it's not the way you learn to speak your mother tongue as a child, of course. You didn't start learning paradigms as a kid of English or whatever other language. And so they say, okay, this is too intimidating, leave it to professionals. And then number two, by insufficient technology, we mean that for centuries, there's just been no way to teach millions of people like you can on YouTube today and the internet. So, you know, you could print a book that teaches people, but because of the intimidation factor, most people wouldn't buy your book. And if they did, they wouldn't end up using it because it's just not as engaging. And so languages are learned best when a teacher shows you how to use the language and you hear it a lot and you see the context it's being used in and get a feel for how it works. And you just can't do that with a textbook. So the other thing that we're really interested in helping are the people outside of literary cultures. And this is most of the world. Most of the 70% of the world's cultures are oral cultures. They don't learn with textbooks. That's not the way they're wired. And so that means that the vast majority of Christians in the world are never going to have a real fighting chance to learn Hebrew. And we want to change that. So, and then finally, you know, when we talk about expense, that's a huge hurdle for most of the world. Most of the world is not a rich American sitting on thousands of dollars that they can just throw at a Hebrew course. And, you know, they're not going to even buy a book because, first of all, it's intimidating and boring. And why would they spend $40 on a Hebrew book, even if they can find one in their language? And so courses up till now tend to have been just for people in the top 1% or less of the world who have the money to spend on that. And we don't think that's right. We don't think that someone shouldn't have the chance to read the Bible more deeply just because they don't have enough money. So all of those three factors we're basically overturning in the way that we're presenting Hebrew to learn.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there sociologically, missiologically. Even I was thinking of the first problem you gave is that most people don't want to learn by a grammatical method. And by that, you mean you get a list of the grammatical rules and you start working through those in examples.
Right.
But what I've seen happens is the few people, because there are some people that love that method, that it actually fits perfectly with who they are. So those are the ones who excel up through the kind of ancient or classical languages, the reading languages, as it were. And then those are the ones who end up teaching it, and they teach it the way they understand it, which is the way that most of the people in the room do not understand it. And so it's kind of a self-reinforcing cycle of, it's not, you can't say it's bad pedagogy. It's just highly skewed towards a very small group of people in the room.
Right. Right, and then those people end up being the professors, like you said.
Yeah, those are the ones who are in charge, and they model
that same
Yep.
that same model.
And then people say I could never learn or master this language because the way I saw it and mastered isn't the way I think or operate in the world. Yeah. And so I wonder if teaching this has I'm avoiding the word democratizing effect, but in some ways it is a democratizing effect. It hands
that's
the language
absolutely the
back
word
over to
we
the
use.
people. Okay,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
That's what we want.
In a way, this is the democratization of knowing God, to be able to hear and understand the language in which he inspired the scriptures. That should not just be a luxury for the elite few. So, yeah. And then
we
you had something
wholeheartedly agree with that at the Center for Hebraic Thought. It's one of our love languages is that everybody can speak Hebrew.
Yeah.
And the issue you guys have brilliantly overcome, or I think it's brilliant, is what one of my colleagues calls the squiggly line problem. When you're learning Latin, it's a Roman script. Greek, it's a weird Roman script. Like it's just one notch over, but you can figure it out. And then Hebrew, it's first it's squiggly lines, and then you're like it's right to left. People are like, oh brother,
Right.
it's just one too many things. And I'm like, no, that's the first week, and then you're done with it. Like, then it's it's like driving on the right side of the road in the UK. Just take 10 minutes, and then you're over it.
Right.
But you guys kind of removed that problem entirely by just visually and orally combining these things together and letting people get used to the squiggly lines along the way. If that's how I understand what you're doing.
Yeah. One thing we want to encourage people to think outside the box on is not to categorize Hebrew and Greek as languages that aren't somehow actual languages like Spanish or English, because a lot of people have put those in a separate category. And so they can be like, yeah, I want to teach my kids Spanish, but they would never think of teaching their kid Hebrew because, even though we live in a world where learning languages is normal and hundreds of millions of active users on Duolingo are doing that every day on other language learning apps, somehow people have relegated Hebrew to, well, this is some kind of special language. It's not like these other languages, so it can't be doable. And we want people to change that way of thinking and just say, learning language is normal. People do it all the time. It's just like learning any other skill. Playing an instrument is difficult to master. It's a skill, just like a language. Millions of normal people do that all the time, all over the world. Why can't they learn Hebrew too? It's totally possible if we make quality teaching available for free and help each other.
Yeah. I think that issue of learning languages, it's going to be a big hurdle for a lot of people because Spanish, I can travel to a lot of countries and speak Spanish. Biblical, I can watch movies in Spanish, right? Biblical Hebrew, we have this other, it's not quite modern Israeli Hebrew. And so as one person has pointed out, I think any modern Hebrew speaker, even if they never read the Bible in their life, they would recognize the first 140 words of Jonah or something like that, just from that have infected their language. So there is this way in which you try to cross that bridge a little bit by making it oral, spoken, discussional biblical Hebrew rather than merely reading out from the page. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and also we think it's sad that that's the case, that there's no other materials out there in biblical Hebrew. So part of our goal is to inspire others to help us create a body of literature, videos, audio things, simple stories. There's so much out there to learn: Spanish, French, German, Italian, Chinese, so many interactive, interesting materials that teachers can get a hold of, but there's just so little that's on that oral, interactive, didactic scale and when it comes to biblical languages. So graded readers and things like that help really bring people up in their ability more gradually and not all of a sudden, memorize these tons of rules and then decipher this complex text. So part of our goal, as well as creating some of, like you've seen maybe some of the short stories and things that we've got on our channel, part of our goal is also to bring others alongside of us and inspire others. Hey, guys, let's create a body of literature, a body of easy stories, illustrated stories, interesting videos, whatever, your creative minds come up with, so that we have something interactive and interesting to present to students of Biblical Hebrew.
And most importantly, make it free, to remove that friction that we've had for centuries to learn the language.
Yeah. So I hear all the filmmakers who are listening to this should be making biblical films that aren't schlocky in Biblical Hebrew. Right?
Yes, please.
Amen. Yeah.
You can still be creative, but just don't make it schlocky. Which I think we may have turned a corner on that. I don't know.
Maybe.
It's hard to say at this point. So I went to a conservative evangelical seminary where I learned Greek and Hebrew, and I'll just put learned like this. I learned it as best I could, and then had to work on it on my own after that. Good teachers. It's just the style again. And I went and became a pastor, and I would preach, and no lie, I would say things like, well, in order to understand this, you really have to understand this Hebrew word, and then inject whatever word I was hopped up on at that point in the moment, chesed or something, right? And now I'm like, well, that'd be great if I heard pastors saying you have to understand this Hebrew concept or whatever, because all I hear anymore is you have to understand this Greek word, right? So I'm like, hey, if they're saying Hebrew word, then at least we're talking about the thing that gets neglected. But it's dawned on me over time. I've had some realizations in the last decade that there is a subtle power move going on there, where as Protestants, I'm from the Protestant tradition. We don't believe in this priesthood, but that the priesthood is of all believers. But I think the fact is that for most Christians, the pastor is essentially the priest over the text.
Sure.
He or she is the one that actually knows what's going on behind the curtain of the languages. And I wonder, so we talked about the democratizing effect that you guys are stumbling into here or pushing forward on. But I wonder if there's a way in which we're actually liberating our pastors from having to be the sole interpreter of the text, and creating all kinds of unnecessary friction. I don't know. Maybe it'll cause more trouble if everybody has a basic working knowledge of Hebrew. I mean, have you guys thought through this or run into any implications of this?
Yeah, there's two sides of that coin. One is that pastors often, that's why they want to be the pastor. It's because they want to have that kind of authority, the inside scoop, so to speak. And they enjoy being the person people look up to for the real truth. And then there's the other pastors, I would say the good pastors who want their people, they want to work themselves out of a job, basically. They want their people to all have that same kind of capacity to edify each other and to preach to one another and to speak the truth in love. And so, yeah, absolutely. Some pastors are going to be upset and they're going to feel insecure and they're going to feel threatened if everybody in their congregation can hold them accountable to sound interpretation of the original languages. And then on the other hand, other pastors are going to just rejoice and be like, wow, thank you. This is wonderful. Now we can all have a more intelligent conversation in our small groups and in our gatherings and really go deep into the scriptures together instead of me just talking over your heads.
Yeah, Bible literacy has become, almost a point of crisis in the United States, at least in the Anglophone world. We track it here. We work with the American Bible Society, and they track it very heavily, Bible engagement and literacy. And it seems like it's, well, my friends at the American Bible Society would tell you that the needle is moving specifically in one direction and quickly. And yeah. I wonder if you've seen any indications about how learning Hebrew has actually caused, maybe not literacy in the traditional sense of knowing all these facts about the Bible, but that kind of deeper, wise, discerning understanding of Scripture. If you've seen any indications of that as people come alongside and learn with you.
Well, we try to tell people, first of all, that it's not a magic bullet, and there's, learning Hebrew isn't going to guarantee that you have a change of heart. And that's what often is at the core of, heresies and bad theology, even though those people may know the biblical languages in and out. And so, we try to make that clear from the outset. This is not going to necessarily make every single verse some revelation from heaven that changes your life, now that you read it in Hebrew. But at the same time, it forces us to be more careful readers, and that's what is the most important thing to me, to us. It forces us to engage the Bible within its own cultural context and to think more about it in that way, but also just to be more careful readers and more balanced in our interpretations. And so, yeah, I think that, and just not being as susceptible to erroneous teaching, false teaching that is all over the place. We were in Central Africa for a while, and I saw that going, running rampant, that people could get away with basically preaching anything, interpreting anything that they wanted, because the people, the congregants, were not empowered by any kind of real knowledge of the scriptures, a deep knowledge of the scriptures. And especially if anybody came in, a false prophet or whoever, and said, well, the Hebrew says this, no one would ever be able to challenge him or check what he says. So one of our goals is to level the playing field so that if we all are equipped with the sword of the Spirit in this way, learning the biblical languages, and these false teachers won't as easily be able to deceive them. And it's just one of the most powerful weapons for defending against, these fierce wolves that go around seeking to devour God's flock. And if there's only one person in your church who has that weapon, what if he's not around when the wolves come? And so the more people who are armed, it's going to make a really big difference, I think, in combating a lot of that.
Yeah, it's one of the I don't know if it's regrettable. It's just one of the hazards, and I'm sure you all get this as well. I constantly get emails from former students or former parishioners who are, oh, hey, I heard this person teaching this. Is this what this means? And I could make a profession out of answering those emails at length. I usually end up trying to find good YouTube resources like yours, right? And then say, hey, watch these, watch this. They'll be okay. So you do have this whole YouTube channel, and Aleph with Beth. Is that your actual name? Is it Beth?
Yeah, my name is Bethany. So
okay,
we just shortened it to Beth, so
close enough. And to explain the play on words, Aleph with Beth is Aleph, the two first letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Where did you learn Hebrew, but where did you both learn to speak Hebrew?
Well, I studied at the Jerusalem Center for Bible Translators in Jerusalem back in 2017. And so that was my first big exposure to Hebrew. And they teach with kind of a combination. You have one class that teaches Hebrew grammar and then another class that's all interaction in biblical Hebrew. So that was really formative for me. That was about 5 months, a 5-month semester, in addition to some other courses that we were taking.
Is that the one where you have to put on plays in biblical Hebrew and you eat?
We didn't do that. You might be thinking of the Biblical Language Center. I don't know what they do there. I haven't been there. But we did have, some days we had even 4 hours of biblical Hebrew where we were doing different activities and interacting and acting things out and chasing each other with swords.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's what I'm thinking of.
Like
yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Can you explain the difference between the Sephardic and I guess we call it the Ashkenaz accent?
Like the modern Hebrew, what you'd normally hear
the modern
in Israel?
Hebrew. Yeah. How it would sound different.
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually speak modern Hebrew, so my ability to speak to that is a little bit limited. But I think the main differences in certain letters are that in the Sephardic, more traditional liturgical pronunciation style that we're going for in our videos, does pronounce the pharyngeal consonants, so the het with that deep guttural
Yes.
sound, and the ayin,
Yeah.
and then pronouncing the aleph as a glottal stop, and the hey as a, whereas a lot of modern Hebrew or speakers will they'll say Elohim instead of Ha Elohim. There's not a clear H sound. So we try to preserve some of those consonants. And then I think the other biggest difference would be the resh. In modern Hebrew, it's a r sound like a French or German R. And then we're using a r sound, which is more like a Spanish R. Or maybe an Arabic R.
And the vocal shawaz.
So, and then we're also trying to pronounce the vocal shawaz, whereas in modern Hebrew, they pretty much ignore those whenever possible.
Yeah, I think Sephardic to me has a much more Arabic sound to it.
It has more sounds in common
Arabic.
with Arabic.
Yeah.
And what has been the most surprising feedback on the YouTube channel? I mean, you have tens of thousands of subscribers now, and I assume you're getting lots of unsolicited emails at this point.
A few, yeah. Most of it's been really, really positive, and we've been really encouraged. I think we've just been really encouraged to see how many people out there are hungry to learn Hebrew and are really excited to find a new way to do it, or excited to find a way to refresh their old Hebrew that they've forgotten. And so we've got a lot of really wonderful feedback, people just taking time to write to us to say, thank you so much for all the time and work that you're putting into this. It's really making a big difference for me, or we're teaching our kids. That's the thing that makes us the happiest, when people say, I'm doing this with my kids or with our homeschool group or something like that. I think just the sheer amount of positive and grateful feedback has probably been the most surprising thing.
And you said most all of it has been positive and grateful.
Well, there's always a few people that that are going to
spill the tea. Let's hear.
Have issue with my pronunciation choices. Or another big thing that's a little bit controversial that we decided to do is to pronounce the divine name instead of saying Adonai. And that was a decision that we thought about a lot and prayed about before we took the dive on the videos. But we felt that it was important because we're modeling to Bible translators, and so our main goal is to enable Bible translators around the world who need to be able to understand clearly the differences between the names of God. And so we didn't want to blur those distinctions between Adonai and the divine name. And for a lot of other reasons, we felt that Andrew wrote an entire, essentially like a dissertation about it. So that's not been popular in all quarters, as you might imagine. Some people are offended by that or feel that it was unnecessary.
But very few.
Surprisingly, I honestly thought there was going to be a lot more pushback against that than we've actually seen. And it's actually been relatively few, the people who have reached out to express their disappointment with that. So that was also surprising.
I think that's a very standard problem, especially when you're working around. I work with a lot of Orthodox Jews. This is always an issue.
Right.
Some don't care. They're like, you're Christian. Who cares what you say? And then others are like, out of reverence, could you not? So maybe, Andrew, you could tell us, I imagine what you might say here, but what is the reason for going for it with the name of God?
Well, for anyone interested, you go to freehebrew.online and click on pronunciation, and the whole book is free. It's in Creative Commons open license for anyone to download and check out. So if they want to see the full argument, they're welcome to download that PDF for free. Basically, we want to take Exodus 3:15 seriously, God's desire that his name be remembered forever. And we also want to take, at the same time, since we are Christians, we want to take the New Testament authors seriously in their use of kurios. So I talk a lot about that, why they may have done that. And so we're trying to hold both of those in tension. but at the same time, and not just cherry pick one argument over another. So basically, we see a lot in the Old Testament of clear teaching that we're supposed to swear by God's name, we're supposed to remember his name, and we're also, even there's examples of using his name in greetings, in casual greetings, like in Ruth. And so we want to take those seriously. We think that the New Testament authors used kurios to put more of a spotlight on the Lord's new name, which he was revealing and bringing into focus, which was Yeshua. And that was, because we do believe that that Jesus is the God of the Old Testament. And so we think that the New Testament authors were trying to tie all of that together by calling him Lord and by calling the God of the Old Testament Lord, so that they would be more closely identified as one. And so that among other reasons, we don't think that they were saying that just because the Septuagint was the longstanding tradition of doing kurios. We don't think that they were mainly doing that just because of some kind of reverence. And we do show in the section, the first section of the book, that there is no example in the Old Testament of avoiding the use of God's name out of reverence. So we want to take that seriously. And at the same time, we want to make it clear that we are not creating this resource primarily to teach Jews their own language. We think that would be presumptuous. And some people have misunderstood us and said, well, you guys are really making a big mistake because now Jews can't comfortably learn from your videos. And we know that Jews have plenty of ways of learning Hebrew. But the rest of the world doesn't. We're trying to help the rest of the world. We're not. Right. We don't think we would be. We think that would be really arrogant for us to presume to teach the Jews their own language. So that's not our target audience, to be honest. We want the marginalized communities of the world. People in Indonesia, people in India. There's not a single grammar of Hebrew in Hindi that exists for 1 billion people. Wow. So we want everyone to have access to this in these marginalized communities of tons of Christians who will never have a chance to learn Hebrew otherwise. And so that's our goal.
It occurs to me that in talking to both of you now, even though I've watched probably a couple hours of your videos, I've never actually heard you speak English. So is this part of, and I mean, at first I thought, well, are they even English speakers? I thought maybe they're just Scandinavian, they seem to have a slightly English accent, but you know how Scandinavians, they speak English better than Americans do. But is that intentional, that nobody is ever hearing you? We're only hearing Hebrew all the way through. What's the pedagogy there? What's the reason for that?
Right. That's very intentional. We don't want to include any language other than Hebrew in the lessons themselves. And the reason for that is that way Spanish speakers can learn Hebrew, French speakers can learn Hebrew, Indonesian speakers can learn Hebrew with us. And we're not telling people, well, if you know a little bit of English, well, then you'll be able to learn Hebrew with our videos. So we're very intentionally trying to only explain things in Hebrew, which definitely limits its challenge. It's kind of a puzzle. How am I going to explain this concept without reference to any other language? But it's kind of fun, and it's been really doable so far, I think. So yeah, we're very intentional. You can find other videos of us speaking English on our channel where we're introducing ourselves or sharing a little bit about our lives and background behind the scenes and stuff like that. But the lessons themselves are pure Hebrew, and that's very intentional.
And I would like to add to that, since our target is not the rich West, we really do want to always think about, okay, the global South or the marginalized, with the marginalized people groups who have very little access to all of these amazing biblical resources that we in America and other places have. And so we want to think of them first. They're the priority first. The U.S. is not our main priority at all. So Sorry if you're an American listening. But we unapologetically believe that the unstated agenda in America is that we create resources in English first because that's where all the money is. And then the rest of the world gets the crumbs. And we want to break that mold and that tendency as much as we can with what we're doing.
Yeah. And the evidence of that is, one of the saddest things I encountered was I was teaching at a seminary in Brazil, in Belo Horizonte. And in talking to the students, I kind of stumbled across this little fact that if you want to come to the seminary, you have to spend a year learning English, which English is kind of taught in their school. I thought, why would you have to learn English to come to a seminary where you're going to be a pastor in Brazil only? Oh, it's so that you can read all the English linguistic tools. So all the, many of them weren't translated to Portuguese at that time. And so you had to learn English so you could read the theology and the linguistic tools, so you could read the commentaries in English. So yeah, it really, and it really is, it's almost like a big pharma issue. I'm sure, I have lots of friends in the publishing industry, and they'd say, well, the only way we can get any of this stuff out is to sell so many copies in the United States first, right? And so, go ahead.
If anyone's interested, there's an entire section on our website under the heading Why Free. And this is not something we have thought about lightly. We have an entire page dedicated to answering some of those hard questions. A lot of people just haven't thought very deeply or clearly about this issue, and they haven't heard really good answers to what you just brought up, for instance. But there are really good answers, solid answers to that we give there, and we'd encourage people to check that. I did a podcast of four-part series just on this issue of walking through why are we in this rut of all rights reserved, copyright on everything within Christendom at this point in history, and how can that change, and how is it realistic that it can change?
Yes. I'll stop there. As somebody who has about 9 books published, I am also of the belief, and I think a lot of people in my world are of the belief, like, I don't care if we make money off these things. I just want people to engage, right? I want people to engage in the resource. I know not everybody feels that way. Some people are trying to get their kids through college. I don't care about my kids. They can do whatever they want. The YouTube channel, I also do wonder, did you have any learning curves coming? I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, and so we're doing some YouTube stuff. So I'm kind of all coming at backwards. My kids seem to inherently grasp everything on YouTube and TikTok as if it always made sense. But I wonder for you guys, if there were any things that you had to learn how to do differently, or do things that you do just for YouTube in this format that maybe you wouldn't have done if you were doing a correspondence course by audio cassette or something.
Yeah, there's been a big learning curve, especially technically, just the details of getting good quality sound and good quality filming and stuff like that. I think that's been, I'm just real grateful for Andrew, because he's a lot more techie than I am. And if he doesn't know how to do something, he goes and figures out how. So yeah, there's been definitely a big learning curve, especially technically. As far as pedagogically, I think we've just been kind of feeling our way a little bit with the vision that I outlined already, that we're going to do this monolingually, only Hebrew. Yeah, I don't think that's been really a learning curve as far as YouTube goes, but I think the biggest one would be all the technical details. Add something.
Yeah. Also, just the pedagogical issue of trying to teach via video is a first in this whole sphere. So you have the examples of Police in Israel, BLC, and JCBT, and so they're doing something that has certain limitations and certain qualities that define or guide their pedagogy. And so, for instance, you can only have so many physical objects in your room where you're teaching that you can use as props and stuff like that. whereas with video, you can take someone instantly onto a mountain or wherever. You can show sweeping visuals of different things, real things. You can have a real cow in your classroom, so to speak, or whatever. So video empowers that in a lot of ways. And at the same time, a lot of those other methods, they're learning imperatives first, right? Because the teacher is going to tell people to stand up and sit down and all of that stuff. And so there's a lot of focus on imperatives before you start learning what is most common in the Bible, which is just the Vav consecutive imperfect, or Vayiktol forms. And so we actually take that advantage that we have in teaching with video, where we're not doing specific interactions in the classroom, to usher people more quickly into the most common verb forms that they're going to find, which are the Vayiktol and stuff like that. So that's one advantage, and one thing that we've been, feeling our way towards, because no one has ever done this before.
And you said Beth said you were kind of feeling your way forward, but I feel like with YouTube and any kind of social media, which I think YouTube is technically a form of social media, success is measured in clicks and view times. So I wonder if you are, like, how do you assess what's working when something just might be more likable because the cover image on it was more pleasant, or because it was a girl rather than a guy, or a kitten rather than a donkey, which I feel like kittens are always going to get more clicks than anything else. So.
Yeah, I mean, we're not measuring our success. YouTube may measure our success and how much money they make off of us by how many clicks we have, but we're not really measuring our success so much by, because it's a guided course and you have to follow the lessons in order for it to make sense, that it's not like each video is competing with the others for clicks. So it's more like, the farther into the lessons you get, well, the fewer clicks there are, because the fewer people have made it that far in the course so far. But the early ones have, tens of thousands of clicks.
Right.
So because of our goals being different than your average YouTuber out there who's monetizing these and trying to maximize their reach, our goals are so different that we're not really too worried about optimization of that sort of thing. Like, is the thumbnail quite right? We're just trying to get it out there so that it's available, and then the people who know about our channel will be able to find it.
Yeah, and also, one of our goals is to reach the non-Western, countries, and so we keep a monitor on that. Are we reaching more people in Brazil and India and other places than the U.S.? And that's one of our goals, that we keep an eye on the analytics. The other thing is that we really know this is working because of the comments that come in, the emails that people very, very excitedly share how, at lesson 1, they were totally lost. They had no desire to even learn Hebrew, maybe. And then now by lesson 30 or 40, they're just absolutely shocked at how much they've progressed and how much they understand, and how effortless it is now to understand when they go back to those earlier lessons. So we've heard plenty of those testimonials that's encouraging us that this is working. The other thing that we really need to mention is that we're not doing this alone. We have several consultants who check our videos before we launch them, who are Hebrew experts, not only Hebrew experts in grammar and syntax and all of that, but also who have experience with oral teaching of Hebrew, this comprehensible input method. And so we get feedback from them on ideas and this pedagogy and all of that. So, and some of them are even watching these with their kids, and they give us feedback on how their kids reacted and things like that. So that's really, really helpful and key.
And so, the analytics, I assume the US is your highest number, but where else are people watching these videos from?
Brazil is second.
Brazil
India,
always is second.
I think Mexico and some other places in Latin America are third, fourth, and India's in there, the top 5 usually. Italy is one of the top 5, I think.
Really?
Is really surprising.
Yeah.
Lots in Italy. Yeah.
Interesting. Looking back at this, you've been going at this for at least it looks like a year or two now on the YouTube channel.
About a year and a half, yeah.
A year and a half. Okay. So what's the biggest things you've learned about the church, the desire, scripture? I mean, anything here that you've learned from this whole adventure you guys have taken on?
Well, I think it's really highlighted how many people out there are already interested in learning Hebrew and have been looking for a way or have tried unsuccessfully. We've got so many comments from people saying, I kept trying all these different things and I felt so discouraged. I couldn't really progress. And now I feel like I'm finally making headway with your videos and things like that. And people from all over the world who have interest in learning Hebrew that we didn't necessarily spark in them. They were out there, wishing they could learn Hebrew, and then they stumbled across our channel. And so it definitely highlights that there's a lot of hunger for Hebrew out there, and people are really looking for ways to learn. So we're excited to be able to fill that need. Is there anything else about that?
The issue of cost has also been confirmed in this process, that people have very genuinely expressed how much they wanted to learn Hebrew, but they would never have been able to afford some of these online courses, and just the amount of money that is to, for instance, a Brazilian to sacrifice to be able to learn is just really off the charts for most people. Mm-hmm. And so we've been really touched by how many people have had that strong desire and the motivation and the capacity, but they've just been limited by that cost, that this is only the luxury for the rich Americans. So that's definitely been confirmed in our experience so far. And it's also just the number of subscribers, how it's grown, and the number of people and voices that have been positive about this. It's also just confirmed, like, this is possible. It's possible for Hebrew to be the new normal in Christian discipleship.
I love that. If somebody did want to give, one of these filthy rich Americans wanted to have to remind my students when we talk about biblical poverty, I'm like, I know you call yourselves broke college students, but you are like, no biblical author would understand poverty in your terms, right? So,
yeah.
But if somebody did want to give, what would be a really easy place to shoot them to in order to give money towards you guys?
Well, we have a page on our website that people can click on Give really easily, and there's a few ways to give online. So our website, freehebrew.online.
Okay, that's freehebrew.online. It's one of those weird,
right? One of those newfangled .online things.
Yeah. And Beth, you are working on a PhD, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Through the University of the Free State in South Africa.
And what are you writing on?
Well, that's yet to be decided. I'm not very far along in the process yet. So,
maybe we could ask it differently. What are your interests in study?
Yeah, some of my interests, I think things I'm tossing around as ideas. I'm very interested in the word order and potentially verbless clauses and the nerdy linguistic stuff. The degree would be in Hebrew language and linguistics, so it'd be digging into the nitty gritty of why does this word occur before the other word in this particular type of clause, stuff like that.
You could tell people you have a PhD in fronting.
Something exactly like that. I'm interested in fronting and
everybody's interested in fronting. Everybody should be interested in fronting.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. Well, Andrew, Beth, thank you so much for the resources, for your time. Clearly how much thought and energy you put into this for the sake of the church and for Christians around the world. And thank you for your wisdom that you shared with us today.
Our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for having us.
It's been a joy.
You've been listening to the Biblical Mind podcast, exploring the deep structures of Christian scripture. For more, visit the magazine at thebiblicalmind.org. Subscribe to this podcast at all the usual places so you never miss an episode.